Well, let's get more now on the Conservative manifesto promise to make pensioners pay for social care. Two polls out today. Well, they suggest it may be one reason why Labour are eating into the Conservatives' comfortable leads. With me now is the Guardian columnist and author Owen Jones, also joined by Kate Andrews, news editor at the Institute for Economic Affairs. Great to see you both. Thanks for joining us this lunchtime. Kate, to you first. Means testing the winter fuel allowance, changing the way in which social care for older people is funded. These are not natural vote winners. So why has Theresa May made them so prominent in her manifesto?
I think political parties across the spectrum are waking up to the fact that young people in particular feel like they've been left out of the government's discussions when it comes to protecting different groups of people. During the coalition government, as much as we talk about austerity, cuts were only made by 0.5% per annum per year. The cuts weren't as deep as people thought they were, but they were felt disproportionately by certain groups of people. If you were disadvantaged in some way, if you had a disability, and if you were young, you felt those cuts to tuition fees and the like, whereas pensioners were heavily protected through the state triple lock on pensions and things like that. So I think parties are waking up to the fact that they need to readdress and re-engage young people. And the Conservatives have decided to tackle intergenerational inequality by particularly rolling back some of those promises made to pensioners. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be means testing when it comes to benefits. I'm sick and tired of people who often are earning less and who actually have the disabilities and are in need of care to be topping up people who don't, to be topping up people who are doing better off and who don't need the same kind of care. So to means test really is to target the funds that we do have at the people who need them most, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Owen Jones, clearly there are difficult decisions for whoever gets the keys to number 10, particularly when it comes to social care, dramatically underfunded. We all know that. So is it wrong for Theresa May to be thinking the unthinkable, to be suggesting that, if you have these assets, after you die, the cost of your care should be paid from the value of your estate?
Well, just on the means testing point first, look, we know that means testing isn't just expensive and bureaucratic. The only way of guaranteeing that people get the benefits they're actually entitled to is having a universal system. Pension credit at the moment, for example, a third of people eligible for that don't claim it because of complex forms. We've still got people alive who helped defeat Adolf Hitler, who are in cold homes today, scandalously, expected to pore over complex forms to get the benefits that they are entitled to. And that's going to make this a whole lot worse. In terms of the dementia tax, which is really quite scandalous, yes, of course, there's a crisis in social care. We've seen billions of cuts under the Conservative government. Instead of actually asking people hit the top 5% of society, the richest people in society, to pay just a bit more so we can plug those gaps. Instead, they've introduced a dementia tax whereby if you have cancer, for example, the NHS is there to look after you. If you, like my grandmother had, a terrible illness, very heartbreaking illness in lots of ways, having to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds, whittling down the value of your home. We've had people in tears ringing up radio stations, daughters of mothers who they're looking after, who are scared that they'll be kicked out of their family home because they're spending hundreds of thousands of pounds of the value of that home, which they're living in with their parent, looking after them. I really think this is emblematic of a problem, or a scandal if you like, which is the Tories think older people will vote for them whatever they do, however they attack them. And I think that is insulting to people who built this country up, who we owe everything to treat them in that way. Well,
the polls might suggest that latter point you were making there, Owen, isn't exactly true. We'll move on to that in just a second. But Kate, in terms of... there is a logical inconsistency at the heart of this policy, isn't there? That if you suffer from a degenerative illness that requires care for weeks, months, perhaps even years, you will foot the whole cost of that, or a predominant, large amount of the cost of that from the value of your estate. If you are to drop down dead like that, the entirety of your estate, if you've set your affairs up correctly, will pass on to your children and the state gets nothing. Is that fair?
I think there's some extreme fear-mongering going on. First of all, I think this policy has been made very clear that nobody will be kicked out of their homes or anything by that stretch of the imagination before they were to pass away. That is not, those money's not going to be taken before anything happens to that person.
No, that's agreed. But isn't there an inconsistency here? Isn't there an inconsistency when it comes to the funding of social care? That if you think that it should come from the estates after death, then it should also include people who die suddenly. They're making no contribution.
Right. Yeah, well, I think that we're just all completely looking over the fact that there are many interim steps before we go to these two extremes. I mean, every other country throughout Europe, and also here in the UK to a lesser extent, embraces the idea of insurance companies that are able to protect you from having to tap into your estate. You are able, as you get older, to invest in an insurance company that if you were to get very, very sick, say suffer from something awful like dementia for years and years, they will protect you, and there will be a cap if you were to invest in that insurance company so that it wouldn't end up coming out of your estate at the end. But this is where I really hate playing politics on this, because I'm not an advocate for the Conservative Party. I just recognize that social care is heavily underfunded. We don't have money to keep borrowing and keep spending. We are already in such high levels of debt that something has to be addressed here. And one of the largest elements of inequality across the board, not just intergenerational, but inequality, is housing prices. And I'm actually really surprised to hear from the left that people are so upset about this idea that people who happen to be wealthier, often live in very expensive homes, shouldn't in any way be responsible for their care at the end of the day. This is deeply surprising to me, given the fact that they're so... Go ahead.
Just on that, look, I'm someone who supports a progressive inheritance tax, and particularly if you look at house prices, people sitting on assets which just constantly increasing in value. I do not support an inheritance tax of 100% on the value of a home above 100,000 on people who suffer from dementia. That is what we're talking about. If you don't get a long-term illness like dementia, a degenerative illness like dementia, then you won't have to pay an inheritance tax of 100%. It is literally
But Owen,
a
you're
dementia
completely
tax.
ignoring the safeguards that
with
exist
dementia.
in between that. But you're completely ignoring the safeguards, I think, that exist in between that. It isn't the case that you will simply lose your whole home or not be able to pass down any assets.
No. That's not what I'm arguing. I'm arguing that after they die, obviously then, the 100% inheritance tax and everything above £100,000 or more would be levied, and that will obviously impact on children who are acting as carers in those homes. Clearly,
Owen, where would you or the Labour Party suggest that these funds come from? Because you are already pledging, or the Labour Party is already pledging 40 billion more in terms of extra spending. That's likely to double because we haven't even heard what the infrastructure projects are going to be yet. That is not sustainable. And I think young people in particular recognize that they cannot sustain that, especially with our demographics and an aging population. So I would love to see the money come out of things like the money-guzzling HS2. I'm pleased to see that the Tories are deciding to scrap the triple lock on pensions. We can save $6 billion there, put that towards social care. There are perhaps other areas that we could cut from, and that would be better. But where would you suggest the money comes from?
Well, again, the difference is between... I know you're not an advocate for the Conservative Party. Obviously, you're very sympathetic to the policies they've unveiled on this. But in terms of the Labour manifesto, and I do think this is a failure of the press, Labour have attempted in great detail to cost their policies. There is no costings, zilch, zero, for the Conservative manifesto's pledges, including on social care. We've seen billions, yes, of cuts in social care. The argument, which I think is a fair one, that as people are struggling, we've gone through the longest squeeze in wages for many, many years now, that those at the top 5%, should be asked to pay more money, including multinational corporations, including a financial transaction tax, as has been suggested in other countries, that money should be used, yes, to invest in social care as well as education and housing, rather than taxing people with dementia. I just think, as a country, where have we got to? Should we ask people with dementia to be taxed huge amounts of money and their estate? Or should we ask thriving big businesses, often paying very little tax altogether, or people who are doing very well at the economic crisis?
Can I just interject just for a moment? And this will be a question to both of you. Sorry, I could listen to you all day, but I've got to justify my pay packet at the end of it. To both of you, and starting with you, Kate, you know, the Labour Party have launched a number of attacks on the Conservatives through this general election campaign that haven't done much in the way of damage. We have seen the poll lead start to narrow. This does feel like an opportunity for the Labour Party to make an impression on this general election, doesn't it?
Perhaps, although I actually think that one of the points that Owen raised is stronger. The fact that the Conservative Party hasn't come out with a fully costed budget is frankly appalling, especially when they are levying all these criticisms at the Labour Party for having a fully costed budget, I suppose, but it's going to be a lot of spending and a lot more debt. But, you know, it's absolutely the case that the coalition government, led by David Cameron, did not balance the budget, and the fact that they haven't released a fully costed budget is certainly an area that I think Labour could probably be attacking it on. But the problem is that on the top three issues, on immigration, immigration, the economy, and on Brexit, the Labour Party still isn't trusted by the majority of people. They do have some support for very specific policies like renationalising the railways. That tends to be very popular when you poll the public. But on those crucial issues of the economy and Brexit in particular, they don't have the support. And I think it's a real shame because this Conservative manifesto, frankly, for me, was deeply upsetting, especially with their lines on immigration. And someone needs to stand up for that.
Owen, briefly, if you can, is this a turning point for the Labour Party or just a wobble for the Conservatives mid-campaign?
Well, Kate's right. Labour face a huge mountain to climb. Clearly, they've got a bit of momentum. The polling's gone up. We know the Tories still have a big lead. But nonetheless, I suppose there is the potential now for the Labour Party to say, look, you've had years of stagnating and falling wages. The Tories now in the manifesto, they haven't come up with policies, let alone costed policies, to deal with housing, jobs, the economy, and they're asking older people to cough up money if they get dementia instead of asking those at the top to pay a bit more money. Will that cut through? There's only a few weeks left. It'll be very, very difficult. But I think that argument about how we unlock the potential of a very wealthy nation to deal with our problems, that's one Labour have to run with now.
As I say, I could listen to both of you all day. Owen Jones, Kate Andrews, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks.